Hello, and thank you for joining me for another thought for the day. And today is Friday, the 4th of March. Now, today's thought hopefully will be, at the very least, thought provoking. I'll say at the outset that it might be a touch controversial. It's not really meant to be, it's just meant to be thought provoking. So what I'm about to say, well, I'm hoping that at the very least you'll think about it. Don't dismiss it out of hand immediately, but just have a wee think. It is, after all, called Thought for the Day. Now, to introduce my thought, I'm going to go into the Old Testament and to one of the minor prophets, the book of Habakkuk, to be precise. Now, I don't know how many of you know about Habakkuk or very much about his message, but Habakkuk was an Old Testament prophet, one of the minor prophets, who had a bit of a dilemma. He was preaching during a time that the people of God, the Israelites, were not behaving themselves. In fact, it was a little bit more severe than that. They were openly and blatantly and unrepentantly defying God, not listening to him, not obeying him, and were far from him. And Habakkuk was crying out to the Lord, and he was saying, basically, Lord, how long are you going to let this go on? I know these are your people, but look at them. What's happening is terrible. So are you not going to do something about it? Are you not going to visit them in judgment? So Habakkuk cries out to the Lord, and the Lord answers him, but not in a way that Habakkuk could approve of or understand or get his mind around. Because, long story short, what was going to happen was that the Israelites were going to be punished. They had fallen under the judgment of God for this protracted, this ongoing evil and sinful behaviour that they were engaging in. So the Lord was going to send the Babylonians down, and well, they would ultimately be carried off into exile, into captivity by the Babylonians. Now, Habakkuk's dilemma was, here were the Israelites, and they were bad, but they weren't nearly as bad or as evil as the Babylonians. And yet it was going to be the Babylonians who were going to come to try and sort the Israelites out, as it were, try to make them come to their senses. So that's indeed what happened. God, after a time of patience, after a time of warning, the Lord spoke to his people time and time and time again in multiple ways, through the scriptures, through his prophets, etc., etc. But ultimately, enough was enough, and in God's good time, he sent this judgment upon his own people at the hands of the Babylonians. Now, that may be news to you. You may be familiar with that story. I do recommend the book of Habakkuk to you. It is a minor prophet. It's a short read, and it is very thought-provoking. Now, what I'm trying to do is ask if there are any parallels to that going on at the moment, at this very present time, with all this trouble there is between Russia and Ukraine, and between the East and the West, because the Bible warns us about calling evil good and good evil. I'm reading from Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20. It's a very clear, stark warning. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Now, friends, in the West, speaking generally, Western society, we have for quite some time been calling what is evil good and what is good evil. We've turned our values on their head. Things that used to be acceptable and mainstream are now no longer acceptable nor mainstream, not least the Word of God and the things of the Bible itself. And we seem to have then done the opposite. We've taken those things which were considered obnoxious, were considered evil. We've taken those things that were ungodly and we've called them perfectly acceptable now. So, in the words of Isaiah, to sum it up, we have a whole society of people who are calling what's evil good, and who are even going as far as calling what is good evil. Now, for years, the East or the Russians or whatever, they used to look at the West and call the West decadent, depraved. Now, it's like the pot calling the kettle black. But that was the accusation levelled at the West. And when you look at what's going on now, we've got to look at ourselves, our own society, and say, yeah, well, we're not perfect. In fact, we're far from perfect. And maybe there's some justification for calling what we're getting up to depraved and decadent. So we're flouting the laws of God. We're denying him, rebelling against him. We don't want anything to do with him. And people like Habakkuk are saying, Lord, how long are you going to let this go on? What are you going to do about this? And maybe, just maybe, the Lord is saying, as he did in Habakkuk's day, I'm going to send judgment on you by these people who, to all intents and purposes, are even worse than you. We've seen the corruption in the East, we've seen the warmongering, and I am in no way condoning what is going on or what Russia is doing. But is it too controversial? Is it too incendiary to suggest that we might even think that God, his patience has almost run out with us and he's sending judgment via these modern day Babylonians? It's a scary thought, friends, because the Babylonians come in, ran riot, overran and conquered. So is that our future? Is that where we're headed? Is this going to escalate uncontrollably until there is this headlong clash between East and West? I don't know. I pray not, and I'm hoping and trusting not. But we can't put an awful heavy reliance on man's common sense if history's anything to go by. So think about these things. The wonderful hope is that God gives Habakkuk the assurance that in the long term our future will be incredibly bright. But that's long term. In the meantime, we've got to suffer whatever it is that comes along our path. So we can interpret that, of course, by meaning that our future is indescribably bright, perhaps not in this world, but in the next, where our inheritance cannot be touched and our assurance is guaranteed. Eternity with Christ in glory, without all the stuff that's going on and annoying us in the world today. I'm not going to say anything more, friends. Maybe you haven't thought about what's going on nowadays in these lines. I have said before, I'm not a prophet in any way, shape or form, but I can't help but think that an awful lot of us aren't really thinking too deeply about what's going on in the world around us. Maybe that's why we're in the mess that we are. As ever, we can get our hope and our guidance from the Word of God, and maybe through Habakkuk all those years ago, the Lord is telling us that what's happened then can be repeated now. It remains to be seen. But pray that we're not going to get an escalation of things. Rather the opposite. It would be wonderful if this would just be defused and we would get back to some sense of normality before things even get worse. Okay, as I said at the beginning, you may not agree with me, but at least have a think about what's going on around us and ask yourself, what's next? What has the Lord got in store for his people and those that surround his people, not least in this part of the world? Thank you for listening. Please keep safe, please keep praying, and please allow me to bring another thought for the day in the very near future. Until then, bye for now.